Hi, my name is Jay Lassiter. I'm a columnist and presenter at InsiderNJ, and New Jersey legalized marijuana a couple weeks ago. And I don't know about you, but my phone has been blowing up with questions about it. I guess people know me as the weed guy. So not only am I getting questions from my friends and colleagues and my partner's friends, but also from reporters, because everybody's got a lot of questions about what does it mean now that voters have demanded an end to cannabis prohibition. So I've got a really interesting guest lined up today, and I'm excited to talk to my friend Scott Rudder, who's in the green room. I was gonna give him a long introduction, but I think I'm just going to add you to the stream. Hey Scott, what's up, buddy?
Hey, what's up, Jay? How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. So has your phone been blowing up since we legalized marijuana? Because mine has.
Oh my goodness. Phone, email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, everything. To your point, man, everybody wants to know what's going on. There's a lot of unanswered questions.
So let me just introduce you properly. I remember when we first met, you were still a lawmaker, Republican lawmaker down in Burlington County. That was, I don't know, 6, 8 years ago. And you were also the mayor of Medford. And then you had a midlife crisis or something, and then you gave up that circus, and then you decided to become a cannabis activist. And I remember when it happened, because I remember how hard I made you court the activist community before we really accepted that you were going to kind of be on this train. But we legalized it. I'm happy to say that you definitely paid your dues, and it's really meaningful that somebody from your background, a conservative Republican, and somebody from my background, basically like a firebrand liberal, can be allies on this issue. So what are your first impressions? Where do we stand now?
Well, I think, let's go back for a second. It is this unifier, right? Cannabis. And you're right. I had to court you. I had to chase you down. You wouldn't return phone calls. Same thing with other folks in the community. And again, I got it, right? So it's one of those things where, as an issue, it's traditionally fallen on one side of a political spectrum. In reality, and I talked to my more Republican friends, my traditional Republican friends, and where less government is better and all that kind of good stuff. Less intrusion into our private lives is very important. And why are we criminalizing something that's a natural plant that we know is healthier? So It's one of those things where, once you can unscrew what we've been taught since the 1970s and 1930s, once we can unscrew that and relearn it, it's a whole different dynamic. So yeah, as a Republican legislator, tracking you down, tracking some other folks down, because the transformational moment for me, Jay, was not my 2009 vote, right? So I voted as a legislator to legalize medical cannabis in New Jersey back in 2009. And I abstained on that issue because it was such a contrast of different opinions and emotions. But the turning point for me was meeting with Vivian Wilson, the mother of Megan Wilson, who had Dravet syndrome, and their story's been documented all over the place. And I'm meeting with her, and she's talking to me about her daughter in the hundreds of seizures she can have per day. And you just recognize as a legislator, who the freak am I to be standing between a mother, a daughter, and a doctor? And that was that transformational moment where you really what are we doing with our policies? And so fast forward, here we are, man, many years later, and I've worn different hats to this process, and now I've been on the business side, the activist side, and we did it. But now what? That's the question, right?
So I'm sure you're getting calls from reporters, and they're lining up into three camps. I'm hearing, when can I buy some recreational weed in New Jersey? Right. What are we going to do about all the low-level pot arrests, something like expungement? And the third thing I'm hearing is, how do I break into this industry? And I don't actually have very good answers for these people on any of these counts. And so we'll start with the timetable. I would be very surprised if we had legal marijuana sales before next Christmas.
Yeah, that would be a tight timeline. And so the reality is going to be this, right? So we have 12 license holders in New Jersey. There's 24 that are in limbo because of a lawsuit. So we have the stunted industry, but all this excitement, and we've not really stopped to realize that, hey, you know what? We have 12 license holders only. And the reality is we've only issued 6 new licenses in 3 years. That's an abysmal record. Crazy. And it's not by intention. It was by lawsuits. In the process of which we're issuing licenses, it's very cumbersome, very expensive. So go back to your first question there. When will we see it? Well, just like most states, we will launch legal sales through existing license holders, in this case, the current 12, and hopefully we'll have more license holders up and running by the end of 2021 once we settle this lawsuit. But we have to make one thing is very, very clear. No matter what we're talking about with adult use sales, patients cannot be negatively impacted. So when the current dispensary operator is going to be given permission to sell to the adult use market, a criteria will be making certain that they have they're set aside, that they have the patient load, because God forbid you and I buy an ounce of weed and we're going to go out for the weekend, go to a concert, and we took somebody's medicine away accidentally. So that can't happen. So end of 2021, maybe aggressively through magic and through permitting processes, maybe at the end of third quarter, maybe next fall at the earliest, but that's where it'll be.
So just a couple things, because there are only a dozen medical marijuana dispensaries in New Jersey, a state with 9 million people and something like 100,000 people in the medical marijuana program. And the lawsuit that you were talking about was brought about by people the losing candidates, the dispensary applicants who lost. And some of them, it seemed like, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but it seemed like the criteria for the permitting was probably kind of not really fair to begin with. So I'm actually sympathetic to why they filed the lawsuit, but from a medical marijuana perspective, it really sucks as a consumer because we've only got such a limited amount of dispensaries.
Look, to your point, some of it is very subjective, right? So some of it's black and white. It's really clear, and you pass, fail type of criteria. But others subjective. My security plan, my this, my that. How does a person that's never really been in the cannabis industry judge applications for people who are either been in the industry or want to be in the industry, and how are they looking at somebody's past experience? Well, that's great, but if you're looking at past experience, you're looking at somebody that's outside the state. Right. Versus somebody who's in the state, who may have other business acumen and may be able to hire the right people, but not, but they're going to be given preference over New Jersey-based entrepreneurs the way that we're having the scoring criteria. So my position is, and New Jersey Cannabis Business Association's position is this: why do we have a competition-based model anyway? Like Massachusetts, all you have to do in Massachusetts, put together your business plan, get approval from the state, and get approval from municipality. That's it. I'm not competing against anybody except myself and my success and my competitors down the street or in the next town over. We need to shift from, if you want to eliminate lawsuits, we want to get this to be a more robust industry. The things we have to do to fix it are very simple, in my opinion. We got to get rid of centralized competition-based licensing, where people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for a 90% chance of failure. That's a ridiculous scenario. Put all their life savings into this great opportunity to compete, and then they have a 90% chance of failure. Why would people do that? So the only people that can afford to do that are the people that can afford to lose $250,000, $500,000 with a 9% failure rate. And those are only the biggest companies. So let's switch from a competition-based model and adopt a criteria-based model. Let's make sure that it's robust. Let's make sure that you have security protocols, that there's transparency, that there's seed-to-sale tracking systems at the point of sale. Let's make sure it's not being sold out the back door. Let's make sure all those things happen. But just if I was a pharmacist who wanted to open a pharmacy, I'd have to get DEA, FDA, state approval, local approval, get all those things done, and then compete. I just open up shop. I don't actually have to put an application together, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with consultants just for the privilege of having a 90% chance of failure in an industry I care about. So what we're advocating for right now is get rid of caps and get rid of the competition-based, make it criteria-based, where just you and I, Jay, could go out there and start a business because we meet the criteria, and that's it.
Well, I think that's what's so discouraging when I tell people who are actually interested in this industry, because there's a lot of people who bring a lot of expertise, a lot of local expertise. Many of them have been serving the black market all this time. Right. And so these are people who probably won't have that much of an opportunity to get into this industry, not because they're not competent or able to, put together a really great business plan or financing or whatever. It's because they basically lack the political connections or like a boatload of money just for the opportunity to compete, not for an opportunity to get a license, for the opportunity just to have a sniff at the license. And for people who care about, the absence of minorities in this industry, like we're putting all of these minorities in this process and it's like Hunger Games. We're making them compete against each other and probably all of them are going to lose.
You want to have, we talk about social and economic justice. The best path to that is level the playing field for everybody. Everybody should have easy access to this industry. Right now, when we issued in the past 3 years 6 licenses, Oklahoma issued 2,200 licenses. Red state Oklahoma has 2,200 dispensaries. They have more than any other state per capita.
Wow.
We issued 6 licenses to their 2,200. For Massachusetts, I forget the exact number, but I think it's over 600 during about the same time frame. The process is fundamentally flawed. We need to fix it, and we need to put preference on New Jersey-based operators, and we need to make it simple. Like, we talk about, you talk about the black market. We talk about, how people who have the most experience have experience there. Well, these 2 guys who live in this particular city, say Trenton, on East State Street, where there's a lot of empty storefronts, for $50,000 investment, they could open up a store, put deposits down, get all the equipment, get the security stuff, get all the right software stuff, and then become a dispensary operator almost overnight. They can do that in a criteria-based model where all they have to do is get a checklist from the state of New Jersey, get permission from the local municipality, in this case Trenton, and for $50,000 or less, they could be a storefront. More investment requires more stuff and blah, blah, blah. But, where we're going to have these, these specific licenses for specific groups. And that's all very, very well intended, but they're still competing for those licenses.
So like when we're setting aside licenses for certain distressed communities because we want to feel woke and good about ourselves, what we're really doing is like forcing them to like compete in an improbable playing field, and they're probably going to end up losing, and we're going to take all of their application fees anyway. It's the people that will do well in that scenario are consultants and attorneys. 90% of the people that will go after these licenses on a competition-based model will fail, unless it's something that's fundamentally different. But even still, it should be more criteria-based. It should be something where it's a pass-fail. I meet the criteria or I don't. It shouldn't be where I'm spending. I could afford to put together a team, Jay. You and I could, with our friends and our connections, we could put together a team. You and I. We could raise $250,000 for the application. We can raise another $1 million or so for the actual property and the dispensary and all that stuff. You and I could figure that out with our Rolodex. Most people cannot do that. And when we have a model that really gives preference to large companies, we lose that local flavor, that local taste. Everybody should be involved in the industry. I take no particular punches at any particular type of a company. I'm just saying that here in New Jersey, we need to open up the aperture a little bit further and allow Main Street business operators to compete with Wall Street business operators by leveling the playing field. In Oklahoma, I have to meet the criteria and write a $2,500 check. I can write a $2,500 check, so can the largest dispensary operator on the planet. We could both write the same size check. That's a level playing field. It's funny because, the program, the medical marijuana program in New Jersey is and has been so bad that there's a lot of blame to go around. We could blame Chris Christie because he set it up. He was really angry about it. We can blame the Democrats because they're always trying to, what does this mean for me about it? And so if it doesn't mean something for certain Democrats, they're not going to vote for it. But now we get to the point where we've got these dispensaries, which are probably making a lot of money because I've seen the lines outside the doors. They all have great lobbyists on State Street. Every single dispensary has a lobbyist. And I remember when I first learned that, I was like, oh, great. They're staying current with government affairs or whatever. And then I realized they're not lobbying for us. They're lobbying for themselves against us and against their competitors. And so when you look at the dispensary model in New Jersey, listen, I don't like to go to the dispensaries because I don't like doing business with those kinds of people. And so I'm left to either go to another state where it's not legal to bring it back or to engage with the black market or the gray market. And the kinds of people that I would like to do business with are going to be sort of biased out of this industry because they lack the connections or the ability to finance $500,000 just to get into the ball game. So they're all really politically active, these dispensaries, and they're really lobbied up. And I don't think the results have been very good for patients.
Well, look, I don't disagree. I think that the challenge we have is businesses operate like businesses, right? So again, I'm not going to make any punches towards a particular business model, But I think where most people are disappointed right now is that they don't have the local flavor. They don't have the local guy down the street, and there's not an abundance of options. We really need abundance of options. The more licenses we have out there, the more competition that we do have. And we also have to understand we're still in the embryonic state of the cannabis industry. It's still just beginning. And we talk about accomplishments and so forth. We just moved the needle a little bit further, but it has a long way to go, right? We still have to get the federal laws done. We really need to see what this market shapes up. What happens when we start transferring cannabis across state lines? What happens when there's a consolidation, just like the beer industry? Major, huge Anheuser-Busch or Coors or wherever, you're going to have these huge cannabis manufacturers somewhere in the Sun Belt, somewhere it's easier, cheaper, and they can utilize sunlight and they can do all these things, and they can mass produce it at grand scale.
People don't realize that, because we're probably both old enough to remember you couldn't get Coors outside of Colorado. There were laws that govern transporting these kinds of things across state lines, and probably it's going to be good for consumers when that happens, but I never want to miss an opportunity to remind us how old we are. I want to ask you one more thing, because nobody's ever going to question your conservative credentials. But you have always been vocal about why fighting for, and I use the term social justice, for a lot of people, that's really, really a weighted term. And it sounds like something that only woke liberals use. But the truth is, being focus on social justice and people not becoming ensnared in the war on drugs is actually a very conservative small government principle. So why is it so easy for you to talk about social justice and it's so hard for a lot of your fellow Republicans too?
I'm a fan of history, right? I mean, honestly, once you realize that cannabis prohibition was founded on racism and greed, and you actually read about it, and if you're a human being, and you spend the time to read the history of what happened to specific groups, what happened in urban areas, what happened to Black and brown people, and you take it from the 1930s to 1971 with Richard Nixon and his administration, then Ronald Reagan and the war on drugs, and just it's history, man. If you don't recognize how cannabis prohibition was started, and how even when it was scheduled as a Schedule I drug under the Nixon administration, it was the worst of the worst. It's worse than crack cocaine. It's worse than methamphetamines. You're right. We all know it's wrong.
Crazy.
And once you hear the stories about how the cannabis policing and what that has done to communities, and how it's separated people from being respectful towards police officers, because those police officers are coming at them and they're smelling stuff and they're using it as against them. So where are you going to have this active dialogue that I have in my neighborhood?
Right.
When I was a kid growing up, we were friends with the police. No one was ever worried about stuff. So once you get in, you're having these conversations with your friends who have been impacted by this. They've been impacted negatively by the war on drugs. Once you talk to certain lawmakers, I'll let him tell this story. He talks about it often. But there's a certain assemblyman who is a sponsor of the bill, who talks about his father. And the only way his father in the city that he grew up in was able to put food on the table was selling weed. And honestly, when you start really realizing how the war on drugs has caused far more harm than cannabis ever could, and you look at the individual stories and you put that as a whole, absolutely. If you're going to legalize marijuana, man, if you're going to legalize cannabis, then we got to get the people that have been prosecuted out of jail. We got to get rid of their records, and we need to make sure that there's opportunity to be in this business, that it's not just set up for Wall Street folks, that it's set up for Main Street folks, and particularly those communities that have been most impacted. To me, that's not a Republican or Democrat issue. That's just knowing your history and having common sense and humanity.
But you know what? That's proof that even though we made this giant stride forward, because I'm looking at the clock and we're almost out of time. We made this giant stride forward 2 weeks ago, but that was just one giant step in an ongoing march that's still going on. Because if you're the president of the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association, you've got to make sure that this is a robust industry and that people have opportunities to thrive and to prosper. That's the point. We've also got to make sure that these expungements actually happen, right, that it's free, and that it's easy. We got to make sure that medical patients aren't impacted by this positive change, and we've got to make sure that that this is all done fairly. And so the work goes on, and that's why I'm glad to have you on here to talk about some of these things, because it ain't over.
No, it ain't over, Jay. We got a long way to go. And again, 10 years from now, we're going to look back and go wow, that was so different then. And then 20 years, 10 years thereafter, it's going to be different even further. there's just going to be all these different changes and all these different advancements. But to me, what I was saying earlier, I'd much rather go to the local store, just like I love my local IPAs. Everywhere I go, it's like, hey, you want to get that beer? Where's a local brewery? It's the same thing with cannabis. We want to make sure that we got local folks that are engaged in this industry. And Jay, it has been, again, since I was chasing you down 4 or 5 years ago, it's been an excellent journey, man. It's been great to go down this path with you. Scott
Rudder, president of New Jersey Cannabis Business Association. Thanks very much for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me, brother.
You betcha.
When do I stop smiling?
Right.